That's a smile. How does that not look like a smile? Jon Favreau's remake of the 1994 classic that held the title of the most celebrated Disney film until Disney had to let it go has been the target for the heat-seeking missiles of many YouTube film critics, and I love the crap out of it. Maybe a good chunk of that had to do with expectations, as the trailers honestly made it look like exactly what people would dub it as after it came out, a flat, uninspired remake that sucked all the emotion out of the original, and yet, by the time that I left the theater, I felt like I experienced the original again. That is to say, I'm sure many people felt like they watched the original again, but I didn't just watch it. I experienced it. I experienced the impact, the weight, the drama, the laughs, the excitement, the inspiration that I always got from watching the original. How many remakes of genuine classics can you honestly say you experience the same experience you had with the original? I can think of very few, and this remake joins those ranks, which is more than I can say for any of the other live-action Disney remakes. I have so much to say about this, I couldn't fit it into one video, so starting this week, I'll be doing a 3-part series on why I think Lion King 2019 is great. I'll kick things off by going over the most common complaint about this remake, the idea that this remake sucks all the expression and emotion out of the original. This complaint struck me as odd when I first saw the film, as not only was what I witnessed very expressive, but it was easily the most expressive that any of these remakes have ever been. I knew exactly what people meant when they said that Emma Watson and Mena Massoud were wooden, flat, and one note in the other remakes, and I didn't see any of that in Lion King. But that's where my experience went differently than that of others. I was comparing it to the other remakes, everyone else was comparing it to the original. Ironically, something that I did with the other remakes, but not really with this one. Once I did start making the comparison to the original though, I understood where people were coming from. The original is a wildly expressive piece of art, and the remake's approach on the photorealistic take does indeed remove that element. But just because it's less wild in its expression doesn't mean it has no expression. In other words, the expression is there. It is more reserved and less wild than the original, but that's not the same as not being expressive at all. Don't believe me? See for yourself as I go over the 3 ways that Lion King 2019 is very expressive. Being a visual medium, we of course have to discuss the visual expression. The characters in the original had conventional, straightforward facial expressions because of how wide their expressions could be. They could be happy, they could be mad, they could be agitated, and they could be sad, and you could tell in an instant. These characters don't have as wide of a range of facial expressions, but I could still tell when they were happy, mad, agitated, or sad. For the most part. I mean, as I mentioned before, that's a friggin' smile! Okay, so his jaw doesn't drop like in the original, but his ears are lowered and his eyes are more widened than they were in previous scenes, so I still get the sense of fright and panic. How does he not look pissed in this scene? He looks like he could bite Scar's head off and not think twice. Dude, I have never seen a lion look so happy and gleeful. I almost want to adopt him. But that's the lion. Some of the characters of other species had to get their personalities rearranged for even further lack of range in terms of expression, and while I didn't really like the stiff and serious personality they gave to Rafiki, the rest of the characters worked great and still managed to get the story moving in this case. My favorite example of this, which I'll talk a little more about in part 2 of this series, is Zazu, who goes from the snobbish, constantly complaining stick in the mud he was in the original, to a nervous wreck who's always afraid he's going to do his job wrong. Suitable for the constantly fluttering wings and nervous-looking eyes of this pelican. But on top of the facial expressions, the environment is very expressive as well. Between the lighting looking natural while also pulling off some wonderfully clever tricks to carry out the original's intentions, the state of the environment, i.e. whether the plants are frequent and vibrant or if the zone looks more dead, sets the tone for each scene just like in the original. I was terrified when the cubs entered the elephant graveyard, as I should have been, because because of how desolate and gray the scenery looked. The reason that this remake has all this expression while the other remakes don't, I think, is because apart from the opening shot, it's the only remake in this lineup that's technically animated. I know many people make jokes about how these remakes are not really live-action movies and are instead CG animated movies, but despite how CG heavy the other remakes might be, they're still limited to a physical space as well as the performance of the live actors. They just work with whatever shooting location they have available and rely on whatever performances they got out of the actors without being able to manipulate them afterwards. At least, not to the extent that they could manipulate a drawing or even a computer-generated model. This is an advantage that Lion King has. Even though it's supposed to look like real life, it's still able to manipulate its environment and the expression of its characters, and I truly think that's because it made the choice of being fully animated. If they tried to do this with lions on real African landscapes and just manipulated the mouth movements, it would suck just as much as that garbage Lady and the Tramp remake. But thanks to the no-string-attached advantages of animation, Jon Favreau was given the full range to deliver a photorealistic marvel that was undoubtedly visually expressive. One thing this remake script is really good at doing is getting across the emotions of the original without simply copying and pasting the entire script. It would have been so easy, much like the Broadway show, to say these lines word for word and add in a few scenes here and there, but they smartly don't take that path. In fact, some of the admittedly weaker scenes are when it does copy the original.
An elephant graveyard? Whoa.
Oh, I've said too much.
But many of the elements that are added in through rearranged dialogue, new directions for different scenes, and like I said, new personalities for most of the different characters, managed to keep the original's intentions without relying so heavily on its beats, something the previous remakes didn't pull off. Look at this scene where Mufasa is meant to be angry at Simba for disobeying him, but the way they get it across is variant from the original, but still effective. Instead of having Mufasa yell directly at Simba like he did in the original, he keeps his back turned to him while he talks, an effective way that helps him keep his calm and humble persona while still getting across that he's upset at him.
I guess even kings get scared. Huh.
More than you could ever know.
Now that's the face of someone who's seen the hardships and sacrifices of being a leader, let alone a king. Listen to this line from Scar in the original, and how much character depth and backstory is added just from adding one word in the remake.
Is that a challenge?
Temper.
I wouldn't dream of challenging you.
Is that a challenge? I wouldn't dream of challenging you again.
One word, and suddenly there's this failed rivalry, this begrudging behavior, this passionate rage that still managed to get across the beat of Scar wanting to become king and willing to do anything for it, but in a fresh and emotionally stirring way.
What are you guys doing here?
We were not worried.
No, not worried.
There's no worries.
Nope, Hakuna Matata.
We were concerned
Because, you know,
you're our friend.
Now, isn't that a clever way of bringing depth and complexity to two characters that were originally just considered comic relief? This remake will always have the original to thank for its base template, but you will never convince me that a script this poetically expressive doesn't have at least some semblance of passion in it. The live-action remakes of musical Disney films, that is to say, the two remakes that brought the music back from the original before this, have been lackluster, to say the least. They seem to be careless to the fact that their directors, namely Bill Condon with Beauty and the Beast and Guy Ritchie with Aladdin, have no experience with musicals and therefore could never bring to life the passionate vocals, stunning landscapes, and riveting choreography from the originals. Because hey, the music is so popular that it'll sell itself. With the exception of Be Our Guest and Friend Like Me, two riveting and visually dazzling musical numbers from their predecessors, all the musical numbers from the remakes have been stiff, minute, and lifeless. And going into Lion King, I had the same fear since Favreau never had a musical on his agenda either. Wow, was I proven wrong. I mean, again, it's not as much of an artistic explosion as the original, but you didn't seriously expect the dazzling and over-the-top colors from a photorealistic recreation of I Just Can't Wait to Be King, did you? That missing piece didn't really bother me here, though. For one thing, it's still a bright and colorful display, just in a more natural way. Favreau actually mentioned in his audio commentary that he wanted to compensate for the lack of colors by putting as many colorful animals on screen as possible. So you have pink flamingos, yellow birds, and this dazzling finale bursting in variety and energy. Speaking of that finale, the staging in these musical numbers is super clever as well. Again, it looks natural, but it still provides the necessary elements for the numbers. When a character needs to take center stage, they're towering the most out of all the characters, something that, again, a real-life environment can only do so much for. Alongside that, the actions that the animals take are the natural actions the animals would take, but they're coordinated in a way that looks choreographed and syncs up with the music. Well, okay, Hakuna Matata is mostly just the characters walking, but honestly, that one's filled with so much comedy that I didn't care that much. Apart from that, Circle of Life is an impressive recreation of the original that sets the tone for recreating the original in its own naturalistic way. Can You Feel the Love Tonight has an amazing atmosphere that almost makes you buy that this girl will have chemistry with our lead. We'll get to that in the next part. And then there's Be Prepared. So, the original is an amazing musical number with explosive visuals, funny lyrics, and a memorable tune. But none of it would have worked in the context of this film at all. Part of me isn't even sure if it worked in the original, but again, save that for a future part. In this remake, Scar's advantage is that he's persuasive. He knows how to draw people to do what he wants, so of course they had to reshape it as a rally call. Do I wish it was longer? Yes and no. It's relatively short compared to the other musical numbers as well as the original, but at the same time, they wouldn't have very much variety of visuals to work with in this environment. I mean, what would they do? Have Scar leap around on some more cliffs? The original is a more entertaining musical number, but I didn't expect to see something as explosive as that in a remake like this, and I thought Favreau did a great job with this number as well as the rest of the numbers. He knew how to stage choreography, he knew how to keep the visuals vibrant. Hans Zimmer still kicks ass in the background while the voice talent kills it. Favreau had a talent for being musically expressive that I nor anyone else would have ever guessed he had. My jaw dropped when everyone kept describing the film as drained of the original's expression and emotion. I understood that complaint about the other remakes greatly, but when I saw this film, it was the most visually, poetically, and musically expressive of all the remakes, and I can only hope that I illustrated my perspective on that effectively here. Nevertheless, I'm sure I'm not stopping any hate trains here, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, if you agree with my thoughts or if you still think the film is an emotionless, lifeless slog like the other remakes. And be sure to join me next Friday as I continue this 3-part series with the second most common complaint I hear, that being that this film doesn't improve over the original enough to justify its existence by tackling my picks for the top 10 things this remake does better than the original. I'm CM Waters, and I'll see you next week.